Hi and welcome to what I think will be a really illuminating session today on storytelling innovation. I'm Lisa Main, the Director of Grants here at the newly established Judith Neilson Institute for Journalism and Ideas based in Sydney, Australia. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which I'm coming from today, the Gadigal peoples of the Eora Nation, and give my deepest gratitude for the 60,000 years of storytelling legacy from our First Nations communities. It's quite a gift. And I'd like to extend a really warm welcome to all of you joining us from all over the world here today. I'm also absolutely delighted to be joined by a super impressive panel of journalists who are out on the frontiers, demonstrating what's possible when you apply your imagination, rigour, and craft skills to the practice of investigative journalism. But before we kick off, just a couple of quick housekeeping messages. The session today will be 90 minutes in duration, and that includes audience questions. We'll start the session off hearing from each of the three panelists, followed by a discussion between the panelists, and we'll include some audience questions there. So please submit your questions through the online chat functionality as they occur to you, and make sure you include your name and where you're from so we can give you a little call out. The session will be recorded and available online at the GIJC website, and this session will be translated into Spanish. So you can access the translation via the globe icon that I believe is on the bottom right of your video window right now. If you have any technical problems throughout the session, you can also click on the top left of the screen where you'll see some words that say need help, get support. So I think we're all set. Let me introduce our excellent panelists today. They're all very different and equally brilliant. First of all, I'd like to introduce Milagros Salazar, who's joining us from Peru today. Milagros is the director of Convoca, an investigative nonprofit newsroom based in Lima. And because that doesn't keep her busy enough, she's also the coordinator of Lava Jato, a cross-border investigative journalism project with 20 journalists from 11 countries across South America and Africa. And as a reporter, Milagros is specialised in politics and environmental conflicts. We then are joined by Ian Urbina, who is the director of the Outlaw Ocean Project, a non-profit journalism organisation based in Washington, DC, that focuses on the environmental and human rights concerns at sea globally. Jenna Welsh from Storyworks is also with us here today. Jenna is the founder and creator of Storyworks, which is a documentary theatre company that transforms investigative journalism into theatre and audio dramas. Jenna is also a contributing producer of Reveal, which is the Peabody Award-winning podcast. So thank you for joining us, everybody, to my panelists. But Ian, if I can kind of come directly to you, and I think I can see you on the screen somewhere, but hopefully very soon. There you are, brilliant. Ian's coming to us today, I think from Washington, DC or New York?
Washington.
Wonderful. Thanks for staying up with us. So do you want to maybe kind of kick off for us? Tell us a little bit about the Ocean Outlaw Project, how you got it started, and then we'll jump into some questions.
Sure. So I was on staff for 17 years at the New York Times on the investigative squad there, and began working on a series called The Outlaw Ocean, which, as you mentioned, was an exploration of human rights, labor, and environmental concerns at sea. The topic captured me, intellectually, and I was struck by, on the one hand, the number of stories out there to be told, and on the other hand, the lack of reporting happening out on the ocean. And so I left the Times and created a nonprofit journalism organization, somewhat akin to an organization called ProPublica in the US. And we have a staff of 10. We've been around for about 2 years, and we produce maybe 10 to 12 major magazine or newspaper stories per year that we then fund ourselves with help from the likes of JNI, and then we publish in 10 different languages in newspapers and magazines around the world.
Wonderful. And one of the big kind of initiatives that you actually started up when you did the new project was actually giving your music out to musicians. And I'm really curious to see, on the front of the project, it says, this is music to create journalism. And I'm really curious to hear what the responses were from some of your early editors when you kind of said to them, listen, I'm going to go and do these great investigative stories out at sea, and then I'm going to hand over the material to musicians to make music.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if, if you believe it's possible to make journalism from music.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, so I'll take one step back, just to sort of give a little context. So the idea was, um, what if we took these stories which are urgent and emotionally laden and should be of broad international interest, and we teamed up with storytellers of a different sort, namely musicians. And we did so because they have their own followings and they have access to platforms that we don't. So I could put stuff on the New Yorker or the New York Times or Der Spiegel or BBC, but I couldn't access the likes of my 17-year-old son, who won't read the stuff I write, but he consumes a lot of news on places like TikTok and Facebook and Spotify. So music platforms. And so the thought was a distribution innovation, get the stories onto platforms that aren't traditionally thought of as news platforms, join musicians, be they electronic or hip hop or classical, get the musicians to take some of the sounds from the actual reporting at sea. So this is sounds that are stripped from video footage of these stories, and make a 5-track album that we then pair with the imagery from the stories and disseminate on these alternate platforms. And it's just sort of a creative way to give the journalism another life and access a different sort of audience in a different sort of way.
That's great. And what's been the response from some of your peers? I guess you would have a lot of peers from the kind of more traditional news outlets like the New York Times. So how's it been received among your kind of peer group?
Well, I mean, my peers, meaning my former bosses, the response was quizzical and confused. Kind of like, what an odd thing to do. Um, the response from, I think, other journalists and readers and editors at other venues has been, now that we're 2 years in, we thought we would sign 5 musicians if we got lucky. We now have over 500 musicians from 60 countries and 90 million listeners. So we're a proven concept and we have a huge audience. And again, many of the listeners listen to the music and get curious. On average, 2 to 3 per 10 listeners click over from the music to the story. And so, that's when you're talking about 90 million, that's a, 2 out of every 10 of that number is still a big amount of readers that probably wouldn't have read the story otherwise in a traditional news outlet. So the response has been good. It is odd and it confuses folks, especially legacy outlet editors, who are not used to taking their content and transforming it in this way and pairing with artists, much less musicians. But once they see how it works and that it works, they, seem supportive.
That's great. And what are you learning from these new audiences that you're reaching through the music project? Have you learned, how they are engaging with journalism, but perhaps in kind of very different ways?
Yeah, I mean, I've learned a bunch of things. One, that we in the writing profession or photographers or videographers are used to delivering our product, our story through the eyes and up to the head. And again, I think podcast folks already knew this, but delivering your product through the ears and down to the heart, sort of a more visceral path to getting at people, moving them emotionally perhaps first, and then relying on those emotions to stoke their curiosity so they go find out, why is this called sea slavery, or why is this song have that strange sound into it? And then they, on their own accord, with their own agency, come and read the story. That's a really effective way to get at people rather than trying to approach them sort of in the traditional, kind of, please read my story, come to my website sort of way. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is we in journalism are used to working just with journalists, and being a bit more daring and working with artists of different sorts and trusting that they'll respect often the nuances of the stories as they convert it into their own voice, is a risk worth taking. It's an existential risk that I think we in journalism need to take. We need to partner if we're going to survive. And I think the project has proven the returns on that.
That's great. And tell me a little bit about how your editorial process might have evolved from moving outside of the New York Times into this kind of much more ambitious, kind of multi-dimensional reporting project. What's shifted in terms of how you begin a story and then kind of go out into the field, collect it? Do you have the different kind of platforms in mind as you're kind of going out to do the story, or does that all happen later?
Well, I mean, a couple of things that we do differently that sort of break the rules of traditional journalism. One, we reject the intellectual property exclusivity model, and that's a big, daring, scary thing to do. So when we approach the New Yorker, or the New York Times, or BBC, we say, hey, look, you're not going to own this. We'll give it to you for free because we have philanthropic funding and we paid for it all ourselves. You can't lock it down and only your readers get to read it. We will give you rights in your country, but we're going to partner with 50 other countries because we want that many more readers in that many more languages. And that's a cultural pill to swallow for editors. They don't like that. So that's one big shift. From a reporting standpoint, we try to do our stories at sea, to some degree for every story. And now that we know we're collecting content that's not just still photography, video, and the written word, but we're also trying to think about audio, for podcasts, for music, for animation series, for mural project. We're trying to think about how we should collect extra stuff from these hard to get to places, because we're hoping to have the story run in other mediums. So we really do, have extra gear and extra specialty come along so that we're capturing things more richly.
That's wonderful. And how do you approach the actual skill set of your production team? Because again, kind of moving from the New York Times, where you're a writer, you kind of have a really well-developed skill set in terms of research and writing. You've now kind of moved out into a whole bunch of different skill sets that take in and of themselves years and sometimes a lifetime to develop. So how have you approached kind of, I guess, building a team and your own skill set to be able to continue delivering on the type of reporting that you're doing?
Well, I mean, I think that one of the things that's very proud about, or that I think we can be proud of as journalists, is that we are omnivorous and autodidacts. Like that's what we do, is we parachute into topics we know nothing about. We know how to ask questions and inform ourselves and quickly learn. Like that's sort of the thing that distinguishes good journalists from bad journalists. And that skill is transferable. So if you're someone like me who says, I don't know anything about music, but I kind of want to get into the music business, well, I'm just going to treat it like a journalist, and I'm going to kind of get on Google and find smart people to advise me and, kind of teach. And I think that's a really good way to approach it, because you also don't, you haven't drunk the Kool-Aid, and you don't therefore already know things that can't be done. Anything can be done because we're starting from scratch. And I try to hire, we have a small staff, it's just 10 of us, but it's a lot of young, omnivorous, curious autodidacts that are, we don't know anything about mural art, but we're going to sign up 40 muralists in 10 countries to paint stuff for us. Go figure out how to do it. It's the same thing an editor tells a reporter. I don't know anything about this topic, but get me a story by the end of the week. It's the same sort of skill set.
That's great. And you're almost mixing both, because the kind of journalism that you're doing is also super high risk. They're really hard to access areas. It's dangerous. And there are kind of, a lot of actors out on the sea who definitely don't want you there. There's a lot of risk to be taken in kind of doing kind of really high risk reporting, but then kind of doubling down and doing really high kind of, maybe high risk, but experimental storytelling at the same time. Do you ever feel like you're overextended on both sides?
Did my wife put you up to that question? Yeah, I mean, sure. I think all journalists are stress mongers and always reaching a little bit beyond. And I'm no different. Uh, and yes, I think that we're right on the edge always of taking on a little too much. And as I'm learning how to be a manager, I always ran my own team of one or two people, and now I'm running an organization, and knowing how hard to push people and or not is something that I'm learning how to do, and also with myself, how much to take on, uh, so that I don't also lose sight of the basics. I need to be producing stories. I'm the only one who's writing the stories on staff, and the rest of my staff helps me accomplish it. But if I'm running the organization and not producing stories, then we all, the whole thing crumbles. So yeah, it's a balancing act for sure.
That's great. And just finally, before we kind of move on, and then we'll come back to some audience questions. But what's been the most surprising element of this venture for you? What have you kind of seen, learned that you absolutely did not expect you would?
Hmm. I think the music project. I mean, so I'll just take one step back. The goal was to produce, 5,000, 10,000 word stories that are in the traditional sense, tier one level, polish, rigor, investigative, reveal, all that stuff, but then to transfer them into something else. And the first something else was music. But now we're trying to pivot to a mural project, an animation project, a video game, other forms of art that take the journalism, do cool things with them for a reason. The artistic pivot from journalism into something else is something that I find really fulfilling in ways I didn't expect. Just working with artists and how smart they are in ways that I'm not. And also just how much mutual respect you can invite if you approach people the right way and sort of share your content with them. They're often very generous at sharing their audience with you. All of that has been really inspiring, because it's scary to leave your lane and branch out like this, but it's worked.
And sorry, I just got one follow-up question, but then we will move on. And I think we'll go to Milagros next. But when you are kind of moving outside of your lane, at what point do you kind of really have to think through what cannot be lost in the journalism? So, taking one of your kind of really kind of long read pieces that you see in the New Yorker and then applying that to a video game. How do you make decisions around, what gets left behind and, what's sufficient enough to be able to ensure that this video game constitutes a piece of journalism?
Well, that is a work in progress, but it's exactly the right question. It's a dangerous journalistic thing. So, for example, when it comes to the music, we made a decision early on that we do not allow musicians to touch the footage, period, because we don't want to relinquish journalistic control over the nuances that you're referring to and end up tipping into misery porn, and sort of commercialize suffering. And so that was a firewall. We'll take the music and then we'll handle the footage, but we don't let any musicians handle the footage. And that's just one example of many where we've tried to make a call and figure out where the line should be. It's very possible I'm over the line in some places, and I'll only realize later on when someone says, hey, that's kind of messed up. But so far, we haven't run into that just yet. But the mural project is the next big thing. And again, you're allowing the artist to interpret the stories and render it how they see fit. I'll give you one other quick example, then I'll shut up. We have this big Libya piece coming out, and there's some sensitivities about what happened in the reporting of that. And there are some animators who are making animation based on the story. And there was the desire to animate the captivity of us reporters that occurred in reporting that story. And we said, that's a red line. No, you can animate the issues of the story, but we don't want you animating the journalist backstory, because that ends up missing the point. So we're trying to make these calls as we go all along.
Gosh, it's fascinating, Ian. I could talk to you all morning and I can see there's lots of questions kind of piling into the chat. So thank you so much. We will come back to you. But before we do, I'm going to now throw to Milagros, who is joining us from Lima today in Peru. And Milagros has got a kind of, a long and very esteemed background in investigative journalism, in data journalism, but more recently has been also doing storytelling in the form of comics. And so in a lot of kind of what you were talking about just there, I think will be picked up by Milagros. So welcome, Milagros. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Hi, hello, Lisa. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to participate in this panel, in this conference. I work of Convoca. I am the director of Convoca, based in Lima, and I would like to talk about a project using comics for an investigation. So I'm going to share my screen here, my presentation. I would like to start my presentation making some questions about the beginning of some projects of this kind of project. For example, for us, was very important. Why exploring new narrative to tell journalistic investigation? It is indispensable doing it in the public interest, in which cases it is necessary to use innovative formats to reach audience in a more effective way. These were some of the questions of our team members ask themselves. Why? Because we identify this challenge to telling a simple and human way a scientific topic that is also social, political, and economical. Because which topic? The circumstance of people who have been exposed to heavy metals produced by extractive activities and industrial areas in Peru. And the name of this project is Toxic Files. And why did we tell the story in the form of a comic? We thought that an interactive comic was a friendly format that could help citizens understand a complex reality. The extractive industries is a very polarized, a controversial subject in Peru and Latin America. Beyond political preference, as investigative journalists, we wanted to draw attention to people's health situation. Therefore, exploring an innovative format was necessary to tell a story in the public interest. Well, for this project, participated 14 people, including cartoonists, developers, reporters, and editors. And we produced 3 comics. The first one was a child with leg cannot stand the quarantine. This is the story of Joran, a 4-year-old boy who lives with high levels of lead in his blood in Callao, in Peru. The second one was the story of a family with arsenic in Cusco. The Cana Quispe family who live near a mining project of the multinational Glencore in Cusco. And the third story is kids living with petroleum. And in this story shows the impact on the health of the children of the Nazareth community of the Awahu indigenous people located in the Amazon region. And to document these cases, our team interviewed with epidemiologists, accessed laboratory tests that showed the people's degree of exposure to heavy metal and scientific documentation on the subject. Also, we interviewed with affected population. We traveled to these places, build databases with relevant information, and how did we do it? Which methodology? Well, The journalistic investigation was carried out in advance with journalists, data analysts, editors, with the collaboration of toxicologists and other experts. When we finished the investigation, journalists, editors, developers, cartoonists identifies the stories that could be told in the form a comic. But first was the investigation. Then we identified some stories to tell this story in comic way. So a journalist, an editor, and a cartoonist were in a charge of writing the script of each comic. So we had different teams for each story. Editors, cartoonists, and developers come together to define the most adequate technology for the comic, because the comic needs to load quickly, so technology must guarantee speed. The comic needs to adapt very well to the PC and the cell phone, so it's very important to identify which technology we need to tell the story and in this format. And well, when we finished the first comic draft, the journalist editor present the comic for review and approval of the general editor. And it's important, the comic was launched on our social media platform with the affected people featured in our story, along with the toxicology, journalists, developers, and cartoonists participated in this transmission. And some recommendation, I think that it's important to include journalists and editors who can tell stories. The rigorosity and quality of information must be also maintained when telling an investigation in any format to tell a story. It's important that someone in the team has a comprehensive look of the process and the project. This person could be the general editor or investigative journalist. It's important to have a multidisciplinary teams, flexible professional to learn from each other. Lot of openness to new knowledge is required to achieve an effective result. Establish effective communication channels, measure the impact of the project of permanent improvement and the lesson learned for the future initiative. And well, the purpose of innovating investigative journalism is to serve the public and attend citizens' specific needs. Not all innovation has to do with technology. You can innovate in work methodologies or approaches to a story. Innovation is a transversal and is a part of the culture and spirit of the team. Innovating in journalism requires genuine interest of trying to reach a new audience and effectively and to involve citizens in that experience. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share some ideas of this project, and thank you. Well,
thank you so much, Milagros. I really kind of hear you when you talk about innovation, not only in the kind of storytelling aspect, but in the methodologies of how we do the journalism. I think that's an area that also, we could kind of talk a lot about, but I know you're definitely a pioneer in that field. So thank you so much for sharing. Now we will move out of the digital space slightly and move into something more analog, to the theatre, to Story Works with Jenna Welch. Thank you so much. I think we've got the screens working this time, Jenna. So let's see how we go. And if the slides don't load, that's fine. We can have a chat and just keep it moving.
All right. Thank you so much. Alex, are you ready? Okay. Terrific. So thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Global Investigative Journalism Network, for inviting me here to share my work, and to Ian and Milagros, who are fabulous and inspiring artists, journalists. I think, well, Storyworks, I founded Storyworks in 2013. And since then, we have created over 14 plays and partnered with probably a dozen newsrooms across the United States. And every time we start a new partnership or are working on a project within a new community, I always get this question, what is documentary theater? And I think if we asked everyone here today, we would come up with a lot of different answers. So I'm hoping that at the end of my presentation, I will have explained what I believe to be documentary theater. It is, yeah, it's a great pleasure and to be working in this genre. Storyworks is committed to fact-based storytelling, and we transform investigative reporting into theater and plays across the United States. And that doesn't mean that we're recreating the journalism on stage. That's not necessary, that's not interesting. What we're trying to do is find a new way into the story. And we follow newsroom ethics, and we're absolutely trying to find, I guess the best way to say it is, an artistic entry point into the reporting, so that we can tell the factual and the emotional truth of the reporting. So Alex, you want to switch the slide for me? Thanks. Great. So embracing the artifice of theater, I like to think of this as the mirror effect. I mean, it's a kind of a common theater idea where it's like, is it a reflectionist or an interventionist approach to theater? And if you think of reflectionist, maybe a more common way to think of it is naturalism. And I would say that as a company, Storyworks, we reject naturalism. The moment that a person enters a theater or a gymnasium, depending on where we're presenting one of our plays, they are breaking that wall of naturalism, and they have already agreed to be part of the theatrical experience. Brecht has a really great quote. It says that reality has to be altered and be turned into art so that it can be seen as alterable and treated as such. And that sticks close to my heart. And I use that, that's kind of a mantra in terms of the work that we do. So I would say we do interventionist theater, and it is our job not to just reflect the reality of a situation or an event, but much like investigative journalism, we are investigating or examining the causes and the underlying structures that have led to the event, right? So Alex, if you want to switch, thank you. Great. And so that brings me to the active versus passive audience. And I don't think this is a new concept to anyone here. No one really now wants to have a passive audience. We want people to engage with our theater, our art, our journalism. Engagement is really important. I mean, we have entire departments of newsrooms devoted to engagement. And so I think of engagement as not just placing conflict on stage, or engagement in the world of the theater, right? Because we'll talk about engagement with community in a little bit, but it's not just putting the conflict onto the stage and then resolving it, or a conflict peak and then conflict resolution, right? And the audience leaves with this feeling of they've seen a fully realized emotional arc with a problem that is solved, right? In journalism, we know that we're not solving problems. We are identifying problems and what has created those problems, and there may be pathways to a solution that are represented in the reporting, but what we're doing is engaging the audience to enter into critical dialogue with the action or the events that have happened. So that, I think, brings our audience to a heightened state of understanding when they are able to have a really active dialogue with the events that we're portraying on stage. And I think of it as we're sitting in our seats, how compelled are we by what we're seeing? Is it theatrical? Is it good storytelling? Is it didactic? What are the elements of the story that are going to engage the audience in a really visceral way? So next slide, Alex, thank you. The factual and emotional truth. Facts define the art and the beautiful gray area. And I think for me, this is where I realized this was my path for my work. I love this idea of the moment when facts and findings transcend into art. It can be fleeting in what appears on stage, and yet it has this ability to stay with us for a very long time. So I think when it comes to making decisions, and Ian and Milagros, you both talked about like, how do you make decisions in terms of like what image is drawn from what angle, or what band you would commission to create a song based on this journalism. These are all these gray areas where I think we have to rely on our principles and our ethics and our instincts, and then our like incredible curiosity and emotional resonance, right? So this gray area can really create, can evoke a lot of emotion and deep storytelling. Facts define the art. And I would say for me and for our work at Storyworks, like that, there's just, there's no question. If we can't verify it, if it didn't, we don't take those leaps. We take a lot of creative risk and we go on a lot of creative adventures with our work, but we don't with the facts. And time again, it's actually, sometimes it causes angst, it's a difficult process sometimes to get a creative solution in place, but that's where the beauty of the work lies. And that's, I don't know. I don't know what else to say. Like, I love that about it. All right, Alex, next slide. Thank you. All right, creating a drama. This is a wonderful, wonderful picture of Miss Sherry Marina, who is a Storyworks theater artist and also an incredible teacher at Dillard University of Theater. She recently passed away, actually, but she's in the recording studio here, recording our audio play, When Lighting the Voids. And I just think that really her energy that she's putting there is kind of like, why wouldn't you want to make a play if you could, right? So we're going to talk about how we do that now. Thank you, Alex. Next slide. And all of these images that you're seeing are stills from our plays. All right, so this is our artistic and reporting team. I mean, we're small. We're, we kind of do everything. We have technical directors. We have a community engagement director. We have an education component to our work. So we create a lot of curriculum that goes with our plays. We have 2 reporters. Myself, I kind of do all the things. And then Aaliyah Wright, she's a reporter and producer for us. And yeah, that's our team. And we can't do a play just by ourselves. Theater is a collaborative art form, just like journalism is collaborative. Like, it takes a lot more people to do this work. But this is our core team. And when we collaborate, usually at some point, everyone engages with us along the way. So Alex, next one. I love this picture. This is in the Living Room Theater in Kansas City. We've partnered with the Living Room twice on 2 full productions. This is a project we did with the HuffPost called Tomorrow Inshallah, which was based on some Islamophobia reporting and specifically on a series of Islamophobia events and a killing that was, sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought. But it centered on Islamophobia in the Kansas City area. And our playwright was Rahana Lou Mirza. And this was actually the first table read with our cast. Great, so we can go to the next slide. This is Liz Ates, surrounded by 2 actors. Liz Ates is one of the characters and people in our play, When Lighting the Voids. And these are the 2 actors one who played her and the other who played her son, Bram. And I think this is just a really beautiful moment of, we had gone and spent the day with her. Everything with like, going with her to meet her kids, her grandkids from the school bus, to drinking iced tea in her front yard, and allowing time for the actors to really get involved and get to know her and her perspective. And so at this point, we identify the story, we have our partners, we have our playwright, and then we start looking for whose story are we going to tell. And like I said, we're not retelling the journalism. So we may be coming at it from a very different angle, identifying different characters that maybe got just a peripheral treatment in the reporting. And so this is just like a really beautiful part of our process. And we bring, as we start to identify the characters and the people, and they sign up and get on board, they say, yes, you can make a play about me. Then we start to cast it and integrate the actors into that process. So next slide, Alex. This is great, finding the plot. And I love this picture because it's the swamp boat. And anybody who has looked at someone else's investigative reporting and then you get all of the information, you're like trying to find your way through the story, and it does feel a bit like a swamp. And so it's really about distilling it down into a theatrical story that we know that we can tell, that we have access to people and documents and all the things that we need. And then we try to find our way through that swamp into a unique version of the story. Next slide, please. Yeah, so additional reporting and research. There's a tremendous amount of additional reporting and research that we do. I have yet to find a play, have yet to work on a play that we haven't had to go and do follow-up reporting and new reporting on. That's part of the process. We love it. In this image, I love this story. That's Santa Claus. He actually appears in When Lighting the Voids as a character. He appears, I think, 3 or 4 times. Many of you have been probably looking at this and like, how is that possible? Did you check LexisNexis? Like, there's no way that Santa Claus exists. And I'm not going to disagree with you, but I will say, for the character who Santa Claus is talking to in the play time and time again, he did exist. He very much exists. Bram Ates believed that he met Santa Claus when he was hospitalized in a medically induced coma over the Christmas holiday, recovering from an explosion that he was in on a shipyard, in a shipyard. And he will tell anyone who asked him, the best thing that came out of that experience was that he got to meet Santa Claus. And so for us, we brought Santa Claus into the story, and he was able to have conversations with Santa Claus that really demonstrated his emotional arc. These were all things that he had told us, that he had told Jen Gollin, the reporter, that he had told his mother and his family, but we were able to allow him to talk to Santa Claus about it, which was really quite beautiful. All right, Alex, you can get one more slide. Okay, and writing the play. So writing the play is of course so fun, and there's a lot of stages to it. But I would say that first and foremost is the journalists and the editorial team. They've been a huge part of the background and understanding where we're at and what the story is going to be and where we're going. And then when it comes time to write the play, we allow the playwright to go and just ruminate on all of that and write the script. And we are in communication if they have questions, if they need facts checked, any of those things, like, we're there and we're available and we facilitate that. And I'm usually checking in with the playwright pretty regularly. But the great thing about that is that they just get to do their thing. We don't actually share out the script with the editors or journalists in advance until we have everyone assembled for a first read. And we bring actors into that process. And if they may not be the actors that play through the whole project, but they're there to facilitate the first reading. And I find that to be incredibly important. It took me a couple of tries at this to understand why, but if you can imagine getting a script, you've been an editor on the project or a journalist on the project, your first inclination is going to be go through and fact check and line edit and all of these things. And that kind of diminishes a little bit of the artistic process. And honestly, like, it's a craft to be able to read a script off the page and to understand how it would be brought to life, right? And what I found is the most successful experience I can give the playwright and the editorial team is to have the actors be the intermediary and speak the words of the play, and for everyone to just listen and take notes. And then we do copious amounts of script reviews and you know, I think there've been 18 drafts of certain plays, you know, especially if they're scientific, highly regulatory, maybe not so easily digested information, which is probably a good thing to make a play out of. But so that's part of that process. And I would say, like, and then of course we go through legal reviews as well. All right, Alex, next slide. Thank you. We got editorial standards. Yeah, so this is a great photo of a project we did with the Arizona Daily Star. And it was about the foster care system and the failing foster care system in Arizona. And the partners actually on it were the Solutions Journalism Network as well. And this was really great. This is just indicative of the editor and playwright in conversation over Zoom, because we did it during the pandemic. But the artist-journalist relationship, I think Ian spoke to this, like, we have a lot in common. Like, we approach problems and we have critical thinking skills that are very aligned. And so originally when I would talk about this, they say, wow, making art with journalism, I don't see it. It can't, how could that be? But really what I think is great about it is that we're all searching for the truth, the facts, the truth. And I think we're at time, so I'm going to stop.
Thank you so much,
Is that a good spot? Okay, thank you.
We'll come back to some of these thoughts. I think,
Yeah.
you know, what's been so great about kind of all of your presentations is that each of you are kind of finding an artistic entry point for new audiences to journalism. And I just wanted to ask kind of a slightly controversial question, but in doing so, and I'll get a response from each panelist, and then we'll kind of start to kick into some audience questions. But in kind of doing so and kind of branching out on these kind of higher risk ventures that you've all taken, is there an acknowledgement that the kind of current form of journalism in its formats are tired, and perhaps that model is broken? Jenna, I'll get a quick response from you, and then I'll go to Ian and Milagros.
I don't think I want to say that if the model is broken or not, but what I would say is that we're able to exist and make this work for a reason. And I think that these ideas of finding this creative solution to telling these stories, maybe we've always been trying to be innovative and iterate on these ideas, but I do feel like people are really excited to try these things, and newsrooms are excited to try this, and editors and journalists, and I think they find it very fulfilling.
Ian?
Tell me the question again, just so I make sure I'm on the right page.
That's fine. So I think, you know, one of the things that's common across all of your approaches is that you're all trying to, and you're all exploring kind of more artistic ways and more artistic entry points to access new audiences for the journalism. And so in doing so, is there an acknowledgement that the current forms of traditional journalism might be broken or not as relevant for new audiences?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would say is I think of journalism, a traditional news outlet like the New York Times, is a factory, and the product we produce are stories, right? I think what's not broken in journalism and what is really amazing across the profession is the innovation and creativity in the making of the product. so that the products coming out of newsrooms and websites and everything are amazing. What I think is pretty broken is the distribution of the product. And this is where I think art is really interesting, in that you can convert the product, but you also can distribute it in really odd new ways. And I think if you think about the journalism in that bifurcated way, in these two stages, the big gap, at least in legacy outlets, is we're not getting to young people, and we're not getting to diverse enough people, be they geographically diverse, economically diverse, even politically diverse. The sort of echo chamber that we saw in my country before is at the core of the delivery system, I think. So I think trying to think about new ways of getting the product out to young people globally in other languages, with different backgrounds, is really where we need to focus our attention. I think there's already lots of neat stuff happening in how we package stories and how we tell them and how we go about reporting them.
Great, thanks. And Milagros?
Well, we explore with the comic. It could be a traditional way also to tell a story, not is like produce like a theater or other format. But I think it's important to try to approach some kinds of problems or complex problems to the citizens in a creative way, and it's important for the team, for journalists and different professional to work on that, thinking that it's very important to explore a different way to tell a story, to approach this reality to citizens, and try to be open to learn other way to tell a story, because all of us, it's a new knowledge. Not only is the information, I think it's very important to try other way to approach this reality to new audience, and also because in this moment in journalism, investigative journalism is not only to reveal information, it's also to how you connect people, how you connect citizens with a reality. Because if it's a social objective, so what is your objective? Is just to tell some findings for you and your editor, or you need to move people to learn other reality and connect people of the Amazon and people with the citizen, people who live in Lima and who live in Europe, the United States? What do you want to do with this project?
That's great. That's great. I love the connection. I'm just going to throw to some audience questions now, and I might kick off this one and direct this one to you, Ian, but it's from Jenny from Al Jazeera. And she asked, what sorts of feedback do you get from the people you report on with these sorts of projects? Do they understand your vision and what you're trying to achieve? So that question is in relation to the people you're reporting on.
I mean, much of my reporting is never seen by the people I'm reporting on, truth be told, because largely, the 50 million people work at sea, we're not, reporting on Maersk, deckhands. We're reporting on Cambodian trafficked, 17-year-olds on Thai fishing vessels. They're not reading the New York Times or listening to Spotify. So if we're honest here, I haven't broken through that far. At the same time, we're nonetheless striking relationships with, major publications in Malaysia and Thailand and the very, Indonesia, And so we're finding ways to get these stories into the major publications in the nations that are producing the very people that we're writing about. So now, once in a while, there's an exception to that rule. We wrote a piece about 9 months ago for the New Yorker about, concerns in Gambia, and many of the main sources that we interviewed, who were Senegalese and Gambian young men on the fishing vessels that we were investigating, we kept in touch with, and they read the story. And I think that they were very moved. And what's funny is, in the case of that story, we recruited a rapper, the biggest rapper in Gambia, to create an album based on the issues in the story. And the very sources that we kept in touch with 3 months after the story ran were blown away by the fact that suddenly this big guy was rapping about the very things that we talked to them about on the ship. So there again, you see social capital is often higher in the New York Times. I never heard you, but I know that rapper, and he's rapping in Mandinka, and he just said something about my ship, and footage from my ship is in his video, and that's incredible. You just gave me voice and street cred with all my peers. So it's funny how things have a strange way of landing when you start teaming up with other sorts of players.
That's great. And I might just get a quick response from you as well, given there's a lot of translation in the work that you do.
Yeah, that was a great story. And I feel like actually there's a reinforcement of people's perspective and experience that when they see it reflected on stage with members of their community, that it feels, not only bigger than themselves, but they feel seen. And that's just incredibly important. So, yeah.
Wonderful. And we have another question from Marcus from Brisbane here in Australia. And Milagros, I might go to you first, and then I'll pick it up with you, Ian. And this is a good question because I've experienced this myself. A lot of editors always, when you're in the big newsrooms, encourage you to be innovative, to take risks. But there's not always a lot of appetite for kind of follow through on those stories. So what tips do you have for encouraging established newsrooms to take risks and to be truly innovative in their storytelling? Milagros, I'll go to you first, and then to Ian.
Well, in the case of Convoca is a digital media outlet. It's a short team. That we are 12 people in our team, and for us is we work like a laboratory of journalism all the time, because is very important not only produce an excellent and a good investigative journalism. Also, it's important to explore new ways to tell a strong story, to reach more audience, and try to show this reality to new other audience. So I recommend that work with people open to learn, to learn new ways, to explore new methodology, to demonstrate or to reveal information, also to explore new narrative, and work with other professionals. For example, not only journalists, also developers is very important, data analysis also. Also, I think it's important to try to other format. For example, we work also with video games. It's not easy because it's a specific technology. in order to use and to develop. No, it's not easy for us, because imagine, for example, I don't like the video games, but imagine if I need to produce an investigation in a format of a video game, I need to study more about that format. I don't like, but if I want to explore that, I need to try to consume this kind of products. If I want to say, and I want to work with an editor of an investigation in this kind of format. So all the time, we need to learn new ways to tell a story, and also to explore new methodology to reveal information and to tell a story. I think it's important.
That's great. And Ian, you've been in like probably the biggest, most traditional newsroom around the world, the New York Times. What tips would you give for young journalists who are trying to change things up in their newsrooms?
Well, my third day at the Times, having never worked in a newspaper before, there was this young woman there her name is Andrea Elliott. She's got an amazing book out now. And she sort of pulled me aside and said, look, if you want to survive this place, you should know one thing, and that is no one will help you and no one will stand in your way. And I remember it being sort of odd and daunting, but also confusing. And it was probably the most useful thing that was ever said to me, because in some ways it encouraged me to take ownership and license and risk, to try things, to sort of pursue a habit of seek forgiveness, not permission, and that's risky, and you can get fired and you can make big mistakes. But at the same time, in big institutions, or especially the gray lady, as they call the New York Times, are slow to change, risk averse cultures. So I would say, number one, if no one will help you, but also no one will stand in your way, that means think of daring things and then build them yourself. And then once it's all built, you don't pull the trigger, but you go to your editor and say, hey, I've got this cool idea. I want to put a question in English language college newspapers around the world that's tied to this magazine story we're going to run, so that when it runs, these newspapers in huge, venues with young people reading them on campuses in India and Australia and Canada and the US will all have on their website this question that engages them about the story. And I think we might get incredible viral response. And I've already reached out to all the editors at these 25 huge college papers, and they said they're game. So it's really not a heavy lift for you. Are you okay with that? Sort of make it a finished package and argue why it will benefit the institution, and it's not that scary, and there's not a whole lot of work, and you've already done it anyway. I think that's the key. Whatever is the daring idea, build it till it's almost all done, and then bring it to your editor. Don't ask on the front end when they don't really even get the idea and it sounds like a lot of work and it's going to distract you from the things they need you to be doing. Just build the whole thing, and then before you open it up for business, go convince them to give you license.
Great, thank you. And I've got a question here from Ahmed, which I'll do a quick response from each of you. What do you think of interactive documentaries? Jenna, I'll get a quick response from you, and then I'll move to Milagros and Ian.
Oh, I love it. I think there's so much possibility there. I mean, we worked on an augmented reality doc, and using all of the audio footage we did for our audio play, and that was amazing to see how people engaged and figured out the story, and I thought it was fantastic.
Great. And Milagros, interactive documentaries, what do you think?
Well, I agree with Jenna, because it's documentary, I think, is very similar to investigation, a strong investigation. It's a kind of investigation. It's not, I think it's not very is closer to this kind of format. So I think it's an interesting way to tell a story, and I love it also, and I agree with Jenna in that.
Right. Ian, are we going to see an outlaw interactive documentary next?
I like the concept. I worry about how many people can benefit and use it, and whether the amount of resources that go into creating it pay off for the amount of people that enjoy it. I think it's like really amazing, and a select few can really consume it. But the bang for your buck is not something that I've been convinced by. So I haven't leaned into it much. I prefer some other crazy ideas for now.
Right, that's wonderful. Well, I think we are pretty much out of time now. So I wanted to thank each of you, Jenna, Ian, and Milagros, for taking the time to spend with us. I'm sure we'll all be following your work in the kind of coming weeks and months. And I wanted to also just give a big thanks to everybody who joined us here today from all parts of the globe, and also for your fantastic questions. My institute, JNI, is also very much looking forward to hosting this conference in Sydney next year. So hopefully we will see you here in person, COVID permitting. And this will be the first time the conference is held in the Asia Pacific. So in the meantime, check out our new podcast. It's Journal. I'm going to give a quick plug for it. It's covering many of the issues that we're discussing here in this conference, and it's also hosted by former BBC correspondent Nick Bryant. So thanks again for joining us. We really hope that you kind of take this, go out there and take some risks in your newsrooms with some of the great insights that this wonderful panel has given us today. Thank you.